Yeah, thank you so much. My name is James Ehi. I'm the laboratory quality manager for Evercare. So I'll be taking you through this presentation, driving accuracy in patient outcomes. We are all laboratorians and we know the place and importance of accuracy in diagnostic practice. Whether you are an individually or hospital-based laboratory, you must have had instance of patients or clinicians not satisfied with your results, querying your results, and at one point or the other, you go back, do some rework, recheck, and you find that you were actually wrong. We are going to be looking in this presentation at how we need to move our strategies on improving patient outcomes in the next generation, because if you look at the past and you dwell on the past, then you never be able to make improvements. But when you set out with definite goals, and your goals can only be set when you have information, when you have the appropriate knowledge, and that is what we want to acquire in the course of this session. Probably when it gets to a point, we'll take a short virtual coffee break and resume so that we can really ingest what is on the table for us today.
No problem, sir.
Okay. The content of this presentation, I will be looking at what is quality control. We'll look at the types of quality control. We have internal and the external. We'll be looking at outcome of laboratory results and test result reliability, where we talk a bit on precision and accuracy. The place of EQA in ISO 15189 standard, what laboratory errors are, the sources and how to identify them, looking at random and systemic errors, shifts, trends, and biases. Then we shall be leveraging on the EQA data for continuous quality improvement. All that we've pointed out, how do we use them to effectively correct or improve our quality systems? Then we'll be closing up by looking at some effective way of reviewing EQA reports, because several people don't really know how to go about.
So I think you're mute, so you might want to unmute yourself.
Okay, I think it's the coordinator should not mute me. Thank you so much. So at the end of this presentation, I expect that you should have come to terms with why EQA matters more now than ever before, through seeing EQA as a patient safety tool more than just a compliance issue. Knowing the role of EQA in accreditation and regulatory compliance, identify laboratory errors through external quality assessment report, leveraging data for quality improvement and review of EQA reports to prevent patient harm. Now, defining quality control. I find that in my interaction with several laboratorians, I've seen that one great challenge individuals have is defining terms. When you ask people what quality control is, you will hear all manners of definitions. Some will define it as a process, some will define it as a procedure. I say it's not a procedure. Your SOPs are your procedure. The quality control actually is a material you handle. And that brings me to the definition, and can be simply defined as the use of a standardized material to validate an analytical run. How do you trust the result that comes out of your machine when you run a patient sample? Is because that same analytical system, not just the machine, the status of the reagent, the calibration status, the personnel, the competence of the personnel, the temperature of the environment. Uh, Everything is put together to ensure in the analytical procedure that your result comes out correct. And that is why you start with the quality control. It's standardized material. Whatever. It could even be a standard reference material. It could even be a patient sample that you can use as a quality control. As long as you standardize it, you can use it to validate the analytical, the basis on which you accept other patients' results. This concept is built on the premise of assaying and evaluating a material of known outcome. So the principle of quality control is based on assaying a material you already know the result. So if it will give you that same desired result, then you are sure that the patient sample that you don't know the outcome before you start processing, you can rely on the result that analytical system gives to you. Because if the clinicians know the outcome of the result, they wouldn't have bothered coming to the laboratory in the first place. If the patient knows the outcome of his or her result, the patient wouldn't have bothered coming. They don't know. And you also don't know, except you are practicing spirituality in the laboratory. But if you must give a reliable result, then it must be patterned after a particular standard, a material of known outcome. This will now justify your acceptance of other patient sample that you don't know the outcome using the analytical system per given time. Quality control materials are ideally made from the same matrix as the patient sample. If your patient sample comes in as whole blood, it will make no sense using plasma or serum as your control material because certain components have been taken out of the blood composition. And why it needs to be in the same matrix is because you want every form of interference that the patient materials challenges it gives to the analytical system. Let the control material also pose those same conditions so that you are actually using a plain level field to accept the QC run that will invariably be used to analyze that patient sample. The EQA or the QC material may be of animal origin. That is how they are manufactured. Sometimes they are gotten from animal origin. We have the bovine, the equine. Some are even made from human blood samples. Some are made up of aqueous solutions, and some are commercially prepared organic matrices, just as you have in coagulation studies because of the instability of the proton beam time and the activated partial proton beam time. You find that most of the time you have organically prepared matrix in those control material. A control product can be liquid or freeze dried, what we call lyophilized material, and is composed of one or two constituents, what we call analytes of known concentration. Controls must be handled and tested in the same manner as patient samples are handled. Some people are very biased when this comes to control material. They want to give extra attention to it. They want to be very careful. But the truth of the matter is that if the control fails, you will know and you can make corrections. But if the patient sample result fails, you might not know. That is why you need to have standard operating procedures and handle control material no less important as you handle your patient sample. Then normally controls are found in 2 or 3 concentrations. We have the normal control, which is the normal level of the analyte in the human body, and we have the abnormal control levels, which are concentrations either above or below. So we have the low abnormal, the high abnormal, what we call the pathological control levels. Then that brings us to types of quality control. There are two basic types of quality control. We have the internal quality control, the one that you do internally in your system, which could be daily, advisable. Some people do that maybe if the batch samples they run at defined intervals or weekly, as the case may be, depending on how stable your system is. In internal quality control, actually, you are evaluating the consistency of your laboratory's performance by simply comparing one value obtained from a control material with another. So what you see your EQA, even your internal QC, is that even if you have to reconstitute a lyophilized sample and you aliquot them, keep them frozen or at refrigeration temperature, it's the same material. All you are doing on a daily basis or every time you are controlling the system is that you bring out one vial, you allow to thaw, you equilibrate, and you run on the system. It's the same material. You are the one actually evaluating your steps. Statistically, this is known as precision. It has little or sometimes nothing to do with how accurate your results are, because you could be precise and yet being precisely wrong. There's a common adage amongst the Yoruba. Somebody says, "My father's farm is big," because he has not been to other people's father's farm. You see, when you are evaluating yourself alone in internal quality control assessment, you may not know how good or how accurate you are until you subject yourself to an external assessment, and that is what proficiency test bodies provide. So the second type of quality control is what we call the external quality control, which is commonly called EQC. And when a proficiency body manages that assessment of your facility, we now refer to it as external quality assessment. This is a testing in which laboratories analyze known specimen or known specimens submitted to them from subscribed proficiency test bodies to enable measuring the laboratory's ability to obtain the correct result on an unknown specimen. This is known as accuracy testing. Now, the beauty about this is that the sample is provided by the proficiency test body. You don't know what the outcome is. You analyze and you submit the result. They now do a peer review with other individuals that have similar instruments as you, or other laboratories that use similar methodologies as you do. Then by the time they pull out those data, as we will see later, it tells the degree to which your result is in agreement with the target value. That helps you to know how accurate you are or how far you are from accuracy. So EQA helps you to assess accuracy, while the internal control helps you to assess how precise your systems are. External quality assessment are conducted by proficiency test body in supplying specimens that mimic standard reference materials that enables a laboratory check their quality performance in comparison to other instrument or method performance. This peer review assesses the degree or extent of that laboratory's accuracy. So accuracies are in level. You can be highly accurate or low in accuracy. So it depends on what your result as assessed by the proficiency test body. That is why you cannot do without this program in your laboratory. Participation in such program is not a conferred honor, but it is an intentional and deliberate subscription. You need to subscribe. You need to say, I want to be part of this program. You need to select whatever your budget will be able to cover. There are several proficiency test bodies and they perform the same function as so long they are accredited to the ISO standard that governs the setup of that practice. It is therefore imperative in handling EQA material that the specimens be handled in exactly the same way the patient sample is handled, so that there won't be biases in your result. If you normally test patient sample, for instance, 3 times and you take the mean, then do the same thing for EQC sample. I've seen cases where people over prepare for EQA material. They want to run the EQA, that is when they go and recalibrate all the parameter. That is not going to give you a true reflection of how you perform. Do you go and recalibrate all parameter because you want to run patient sample, or you feel the patient sample is less important? Your EQA should help you run the patient sample accurately and not the other way around. That is why if the EQA fails, there is room for corrective action. But if the patient sample fails, and that's what most scientists don't realize, that the result from the patient sample may fail. Now, if you fail to adopt a right procedure, the truth is that your laboratory may seem to be performing well, but you are actually failing to get the maximum benefit of the EQA program, the External Quality Assessment Program. In effect, the assessment will reflect how well you could perform a test and not necessarily how well you are performing. Those are two different things. How well you could perform because you prepared, you went the extra mile before you started assaying the EQA material. So that is how well you could be performing. But in reality, you are not performing well because at the time you are running the patient sample, you are not doing the same thing. That is why you need to be, whatever is good for the goose is good for the gander. Whatever you are applying for your EQA material, you should also subject the same thing to your patient's samples. Now, this brings me to the second section, which is we're going to talk a bit on laboratory results and validity. Please, if you have any question, you can just pen them down or type them in the chat box so that we can attend to them at the end of the presentation. Now, when a diagnostic test is performed in the laboratory, the outcome is a result. All we sell in the laboratories are results. The patient submit any sample, you are giving the person a result, whether electronic or hard copy on paper. All we are selling is results. So every transaction that comes to the lab with the patient sample and the monetary value, the only thing we are giving out is the result. The result may be that for a patient sample, or it could be the result for a quality control material. They are all results. Results usually come in 3 different formats. They could be quantitative, where a numerical value is attached and speaks a lot about what the condition of the person is. The result could also be qualitative, especially where we report them as positive or negative, that is being reactive or non-reactive to certain antigen or antibody. Or sometimes the result may be semi-quantitative, where categorization of the result is limited to certain values, different values. For instance, you're dealing with high risk, low risk, medium risk, things like troponin, T. Those are some examples of semi-quantitative. For quantitative tests, effective evaluation of the quality control result employs specialized use of statistical concept to monitor quantitative data sets of assay. I will explain all this as we go on. If you want to understand how best to use quality control results, then the sets of data that you generate quantitatively, if you apply the use of statistics, it will help you to see the distribution of the data within that set. And this statistical process entails regular testing of quality control products along with patient sample and a comparison of the quality control result with specific statistical limits. We now begin to play with statistical terms like mean, standard deviation, coefficient of variation, just to see whether the sets of data you are getting from your quality control fall within defined patterns, because there is a standard defined pattern. And if you lose out on that defined pattern, you might just be running and generating wrong results. Then we also talk about the qualitative test, which are outcomes of reactive or non-reactive. The interpretation outcomes are dependent on the absence or presence of certain antigen or antibodies. And for semi-quantitative, they are also tied to some titer values that influences classification. Um, Reliability of test results. This is one of the key part of laboratory function. Though quality in the lab itself spans across the entire phase of operation, which spans from the pre-analytic to the analytic to the post-analytic. However, in the analytic phase, where the EQA plays a major role, test result reliability is key. And test result reliability is hinged on two phenomena, which are accuracy and precision. If a clinician is to make an accurate diagnosis of a disease condition, the doctor definitely will require the result from the lab, not just what the machine gives, but an accurate result. Because a wrong result at such a time may lead to a mislead diagnosis. And if somebody is under serial monitoring, probably being admitted in the hospital undergoing certain therapy, chemotherapy, blood transfusion, and they need to measure if the person is improving with time, and you see them asking the same test over a number of days. Now, all the doctor is interested in is the serial monitoring. Is this person improving, or the situation is deteriorating? If your analyzers are not precise, at that point you're going to mislead the clinician, because on the day your results are highly imprecise, he would think he's making progress, not knowing that he is actually retrogressing. So accuracy and precision are the two major components that make up how reliable your results are. And these two phenomena are actually measured by the EQA, that is, the accuracy is measured by the EQA, and your precision is measured by your internal quality control. And this brings me to a graphical display that shows how accuracy and precision pans out. On the vertical axis, which is the y-axis, we have accuracy, and on the horizontal axis, which is the x-axis, we have the precision. That means precision increases along this line, while accuracy increases along this line. So if you look at, there are four quadrants here. If you divide this into four, there are four quadrants every laboratory analytical system must fall into. Now, take note, systems are not fixed. That is why even after you calibrate it, there is a calibration timeout period, depending on the number of days, depending on the number of sample. It's just like a weighing scale, whether digital or analog. If you get 100 people to come and take their body mass on on a scale, by the time you start dealing with 20, you find that the 20th individual, you find that that scale is no longer on zero. It has shifted. You need to readjust it. You need to eliminate that bias. You need to zero that bias. If not, you will factor an inaccuracy into the patient or weight or body mass you are measuring. The same thing happens with your analytical system. For the fact that you have set it up to run accurately doesn't mean that it remains there. With time, per reagent shelf life on board, especially those that have reagents staying beyond the expected shelf life, those that calibrate longer than expected as stated by the manufacturer's instruction, or even sample volumes. If your sample volume is so high, man, you might need to recalibrate more often. So that will bring you into four possibilities. Now we have the low accuracy, which is the lower quadrant you have here, because accuracy is low here and precision is low here, and you can see all the points scattered darting about. That shows that your result and then they're precise. You run it this time, you get 12.3 gram per deciliter of hemoglobin. You run it the second time, you're getting 15.2. You just find that you are darting here and there. That is not a precise system. You need precision. In fact, the worst conditions that can affect any analytical system is imprecision. If you have imprecision, it's better not to even run that test. Inaccuracies are even a bit on the right side to manage, but I will explain them what I mean by manage. Now, if you are on this level, this is the worst level your analytical system can operate on. Then on the same horizontal axis, we have accuracy is actually on the y-axis, so that's why accuracy is low here. But here you see that precision has increased. So you see how precise the result, all the points are in one section. That means there is good reproducibility, there is good precision. However, they are far from the target value, which is the accuracy measurement. Now, if this was your internal control, it simply shows that you have good precision. I see people who say my IQCs are all within the acceptable limit. Why? How can you say that my result is wrong? You could be precise and be precisely wrong. This is the picture that plays out when that happens. Then the third scenario is when your accuracy is high, but precision is still low, as obtained here. So you see that your points are close to the bull eye, but they are scattered around, just 2 points within the bull eye, and others surround that region. So you find that precision seems to be low here because they are scattered here and there, but accuracy you seem to be revolving around the mean or the acceptable target values. This is another scenario that happens in the lab. Then the ideal situation, which we can see on the fourth quadrant, is where the accuracy is high and the precision is high. And you see all the points clustered together within the bull eye. That means there is precision and there is accuracy. Take note, no analytical system is fixed in any of this. Even if you are achieving this ideal configuration today, because the reagent you are using, the calibration, sometimes some people don't even stock calibrators according to manufacturer's specification. They are valid, most of the calibrators are valid for 28 days when frozen. If you are going to refrigerate, I mean, they are valid for 28 days when refrigerated. Then if you must ensure that it keeps longer, up to 90 days, then you need to aliquot and freeze them. But I see laboratories where somebody will say, I forgot. And on the second month, they are still using it to recalibrate. You're not going to get an effective calibration of your system. You're going to be having cases of inaccuracy. Your accuracies will be low, like what you have in the lower quadrants. That brings us to the place of EQA in ISO 15189 standard. If the essence of the standard is to put the minimum requirements for not just for accreditation, but also, as we shall see later, for patient safety and obtaining good results that will not harm the patient. So we're looking at the place of EQA. Does EQA have a prominence? I looked at the ISO 2022 standard, and I just took this excerpt from the introduction, which was very, very captivating. He said the excerpt says that the objective of the document, that is the ISO document, is to promote the welfare of patients. The essence of the standard is not for you to frame a certificate and hang in your organization that we have ISO 15189-2022 standard. In fact, somebody will say, what is ISO? ISO is paper. If your test result cannot convey or does not translate that you are meeting the requirement of the standard, then all you have is just a shelf where you have displayed your commodity or your certificates, just like a store that sells good. So the essence or the objective of the document is to promote the welfare of the patient and satisfaction of laboratory users, be they customers, be they clinicians that send their samples in. And this is achieved through confidence in the quality and competence of that medical laboratory. And that's what the ISO 15189 standard is all about. It's there to ensure that you have quality and competence in laboratory practice. The benefit of this approach includes increasing the effectiveness of the management system, decreasing the probability of invalid results, and reducing potential harm to patients, laboratory personnel, the public, and the environment at large. When the ISO standard says decreasing probability, as long as you have human beings employed as your personnel in your lab, you cannot eliminate errors. You can decrease error, decrease the chances of errors happening. That is what the ISO standard helps you to achieve. So please don't fall fallible that an ISO accredited lab can never make a laboratory error. It only has a high chance of picking when the error occurs so that it will have less impact on the patient. There are things that are built in the quality management system to help you pick out those errors before they come into limelight. And that's the not only to the patient, also to the laboratory personnel and the public. Or else, how can you define when a laboratory does not incinerate its waste or does not denatures the microbiological media before discarding it into the environment? They only end up handling the environment and the public. Now, I went to the section that on the ISO standard, the 2022 standard that talked about EQA and looking at EQA as an ISO requirement. Clause 7.3.7 of the ISO standard is talking about ensuring the validity of examination results, ensuring the validity of examination results. So a lot of results coming out from different labs are invalid. They are not true. They are not reliable. They are not true reflection of the patient condition. Now, the standard states the laboratory shall have a procedure. And when the standard says shall, that is a legal term because that is a legal document. That shall there means must. It's not negotiable. If it is something that is nice to have, it will state there should. So take note when you come across those two terminologies when you're reading through the standard. When you see should, that means it's a nice to have. If you have it, it's a plus. But if you see shall, it's non-negotiable. The laboratory shall have a procedure for monitoring the validity of results. You are the one that's going to have that procedure. You would be the one to define it. No other institution would define that for you. If somebody is defining the validity of your result, that is certification. That is no longer accreditation. In accreditation, you have a procedure that validates your result. The resulting data shall be recorded in such a way, those are the QC data, shall be recorded in such a way that trends and shifts are detectable, and where practicable, statistical techniques shall be applied to review the result. This monitoring shall be planned and reviewed. Now, the standard is telling you the importance of quality control, that your quality control cannot just be listed in a table. It is within the range and final full stop. No, you need to display your record in such a way that it helps you to detect trends, detect shifts, whatever method you want to use. These are the key indicators of when you are deviating from one quadrant to another, when you are moving from the acceptable quadrant of high precision and high accuracy to an unacceptable level. These are the things you need to know. If you don't see trends, you don't see shift, you may not be able to act. And normally these trends and shifts are usually very, very subtle. Most of the time, they are not things you pick easily because they are still within the allowable ranges given by the manufacturer of the control material. And where practicable, you are also advised to use statistical techniques. There are other statistical techniques, coefficient of variation, bias, which you use to see, to review the outcome of your result. This shall be planned and reviewed continually. Then there is that section 7.3.7 we talked about in the previous slide is the general introduction. Then the point 1 talks about internal quality control, and this section point 3 talks about external quality assessment. These are just extracted from the ISO standard. You can get the standard to see details. Now, the laboratory shall monitor its performance. This is another shall. If you want to meet the standard, the laboratory shall monitor its performance of examination methods. Whatever methodology you are using to result patient's sample must be subjected to a monitoring system by comparing the result of other laboratories. And you won't have the access to other laboratory much more than a proficiency test body where other laboratory are already participants. This includes participation in EQA program appropriate to that examination system and interpretation of the examination result. There are some EQA programs that are not appropriate, as we shall see later. And this new revision of the ISO standard, the 2012, which supersedes the 2022, which supersedes the 2012, also includes examination methods for POCTs. So don't have POCT and say they are not included. They are now included under the ISO standards. Now, the beauty of the standard is that you could be carried away by the ISO standard, seeing it more as an accreditation or regulatory requirement. Because HEFEMA is coming, I need to have this. Because the Medical Council is coming to visit me, I need to have that. It's far beyond that. And until we begin to see beyond the EQA as a compliance tool, we will never get the full benefit. It's in this part of the world that when you have ISO accreditation, it becomes a marketing advantage. In the advanced world, it is a prerequisite to even start the laboratory. So if your lab is not ISO accredited, you will clearly indicate it on your signboard so that people know that this is not accredited. So you find that everybody just wants to align with accreditation because it's the basics, it's the norm. But here, because there are no enforcement, as I might so say, everybody opens the lab, everybody wants to run a system, and there are no quality systems in place. And when somebody comes out and gets that accreditation, the person feels, I have done more than every other person. Don't use that fellow, use me. EQA rather should be used as a patient safety tool because it's about the welfare of the patient. From the introduction of that 2022 standard is clearly indicated here. It is for the objective of the patient's welfare. Now, for the following reasons, One, behind every specimen or tube submitted to the laboratory is a life. You see, sometimes we can be carried away by doing the same routine things over and over again, and thereby truly missing out on what we are called to do. We're actually called to save life. But now we see tubes as ordinary tubes. That's why some people will leave samples and say, I will come back the following day. I forgot the sample in the drawer instead of in the refrigerator. You come back the following day, instead of calling the patient for a resample, you just want to analyze it so that they do not say, I did not do what I'm supposed to do. We have a lot of damage control because we don't know the importance of life attached to it. Behind every specimen that comes to the laboratory is a life. A life, most often than not, in their need of medical attention. The laboratory is not a museum, it's not a tourist center. Only few people come to the lab just to check, maybe do one or two tests to see, just to confirm. They already know the outcome. The majority of people that come to the laboratory, I tell you, they are in their need of medical attention. Behind every tube you see, there is a life that may not have an opportunity for a rework, because some of us are so careless with patient sample. You tell the patient that it's spilled. You tell somebody that the cerebrospinal fluid spilled on transit. Do you know what it takes to get it out? Now, there may not be another opportunity. Time may be very, very critical for it, may be of the essence in determining whether that person lives or passes on. Then number four, that every sample sent to the lab is a life that may be directly or indirectly connected to you. I use the word connected and not related because we are so biased when it comes to our own family relations. If our family relations want to have a test done, if you have experienced it before, you can testify of it. How you will safeguard the sample from the pre-analytic to the analytic and to the post-analytic to ensure there is no error anywhere. But because that person that is coming is not directly connected to you, you feel you can handle it anyway. There is a life behind it. Or it may even turn out to hurt you or your organization. It may turn out to hurt you because it may be somebody you know dearly and you have just wasted that person's sample, issued a wrong result, compromise that person's sample that may not be easy to get again. Or you may even put your organization in a very difficult space of litigation. In this case of increased litigation against laboratory results, you cannot afford to put your organization in such a difficult point. That is why you need to see the EQA beyond regulatory compliance. You need to see it as a patient safety tool. Then this brings us to the segment where we'll be looking at leveraging EQA data for continuous quality improvements. Leveraging EQA data for continuous quality improvement. There are so many things, so many data, so many information that are present on your EQ report. It's just that several people have limitations in understanding these. And that is why they just pick up their EQA. The first thing they look out for, am I within the 2SD value? Yes. And that means I have no problem. And the only comment they enter is that result acceptable, accept patient run. It's beyond that. There are several other information you can derive if improving your system. Quality is not static. Quality is dynamic. As somebody said, it's not a destination, it's a journey. So if it's a journey, then there are things you can always improve on the way. There's always one way you could make it better than the way you did it the last time. So in leveraging on this data for improvement, you need an in-depth knowledge of the underlisted modules to effectively use EQA data for continuous quality improvement. One, you need to really understand systematic statistical display of QC data. How do you display QC data? understand the rules that govern the game. You cannot budge from basketball into football and you expect to win the laurels, because in basketball you play with your hand, in football you play with your legs. Then you need to understand how to define your own quality control protocol. Then this will help you in detecting and resolving errors. How do you display QC data? Some laboratories are still listing out their QC on sheets of paper. Uh, Whether it is within range, that means the manufacturer say it should be between 17 and 47, and they just put it there, and every day they are running the control, and they just put the result there, and it's within range, accept, within range, accept. If you are tabulating your QC result in that manner, it is not good enough, as it is not sensitive enough to help you pick subtle trends in the performances. The most effective way to display result is on a Levi-Jennings chart. A Levi-Jennings chart is prepared by applying normal statistics like mean, standard deviation, coefficient of variation to your QC data. Someone may argue that the ISO standard did not say you should use Levi-Jennings chart, but the ISO standard states you must put your QC in a way that helps you to detect trends and shift easily. So whether you are using the box and whiskers method, whether you are using the bar chart, whether you are using the histogram, whichever method you are using, it should help you pick up subtle trends, things that you will not see necessarily in result being tabulated. This will help you to dictate them out. That is the only time you can take action to correct, because if you cannot detect it, then you cannot fix it. First of all, you must see that there is a problem before you talk of fixing. A chart is created for each test result and different levels, depending on the number of control levels you run in your lab. You calculate your decision limits, where 1, 2, and the 3 standard deviation value from the mean. An LG chart is typically derived from a bell-shaped curve overlaid on quality control values to illustrate the overall distribution of data. This is called the Gaussian distribution curve. Why a lot of people find it hard to comprehend the LG chart is because they don't even know where it was derived from. It was derived from what we call the Gaussian distribution curve. Most of the time, when we finished our degree programs and we've learned what in statistics, we just feel that we don't need them again. Actually, this is just everything about quality control is just the application of statistics. So you might need to just go back and look at it. Now, a Gaussian distribution curve is a bell-shaped curve that governs the distribution of data, quality control data inclusive, how they are distributed within that curve. Now, if you calculate 1, 2, 3 SD, at least 68.2% of data will fall between plus or minus 1 SD. 68.2%. Take it whatever you want, as long as you are dealing with figures. It could be weight, it could be height, it could be control result, and these are your internal quality control where you run controls on a daily basis. All you are getting is a result, a figure, quantitative data. When you have a set of data and you subject them to the Gaussian distribution curve, you will find that 68.2% of them fall within the 1 SD. Then 95.5% will fall within 2 standard deviation, while 99.7% will fall within 3 standard deviation. Take any figure, go back and practice it. You will understand what I'm saying. It will obey this rule. It's just like the law of gravity. It's approximately 10 meter per second square on the surface of the earth, except for the equator, where it bulges. If not, the acceleration due to gravity is basically constant. So if for any reason you are not getting acceleration due to gravity, when your location at 7 meter per second square, you know that there is an experimental error. Now, this Gaussian distribution curve was done by Livier and Jenny in this format. They just turned the graph and they removed the bell shape curve so that it now remains this graphical displays. This is how we get our LG chart. So this becomes your mean, this becomes your +1, +2, -1, -2, and so on and so forth. This is just giving you a background of how the LG chart was derived. It's just from the Gaussian distribution curve. And when you run your quality control, the distribution normally should be like this, data appearing on both sides of the mean. So if all the data are on one side of the mean, it's indicative of a problem. If all the data are dattling about from one extreme to the other, as we shall see when we look at the rules, you know there is a problem. So ideally, your QC distribution should be on both sides of the mean. So that brings us to quality control rules. I knew I love Usain Bolt very well. He's a very, very great athlete. We all know him for the exploit he did. Even his records he set is yet to be broken. When it comes to track and field, the 100-meter dash, the 200. Another man felt that if he ventures into football, he just loves football, that he's going to outrun everybody and score goals more than any other striker. But little did he realize that the rules of the track and field is different from the rules of football. The rules of the track and field, nobody ventures into your lane. If not, that fellow is disqualified. You maintain your lane. The rules of the football, there are no lanes. In fact, if you beat the first fellow, the second person most probably is not coming for the ball, is coming for you to remove you from just to stop you by all means. By the time he started playing football, he just hung his boot because that there was no need to continue at that point. There are rules that governs. Yes, you may have the strength, you may have the pace, but there are rules that needs to be applied. You may have the quality control material. If you don't understand the rules to apply, you will not know when to accept or to reject patient's rule. The rule help you to detect inappropriate bias and imprecisions that may affect the quality of result generated by your laboratory. Control rules must be applied before reporting any patient data. You cannot release any patient result from your lab without or that is not attached to a valid QC run. There are several rules that can be derived from the great work done by James Westgard, but there are 6 major rules of interest which have come to play a role in defining analytical quality control systems, and we'll be looking at 6 of them. You can define many more. In fact, you can derive, as you see some from some of the examples I will show you later. You can create rules for yourself, but 6 are paramount. You cannot use less than these 6 in your laboratory. If not, you are going to miss out on subtle trends, changes in the pattern from an ID distribution. So the first rule we shall be looking at is what we call the 1-2S rule. Instead of calling it 1-2SD, because if I put 1-2SD, it sounds so long and somebody may mistaken that 1-2 to be 2FSD. So the SD is written as a subscript to the 1, and it simply means one result is outside the 2SD range or limit of your control. This is a warning rule which is violated when the single control run is outside the ±2 standard deviation limit. This is indicative of a random error. As you see in this graphical display, this is your 2SD, this is your mean, and you can see the run here greater than 2SD. This is an example of a 1-2S rule violation. The second rule we'll be looking at is what we call the 1-3S. This rule identifies unacceptable random error. It could still be a random error, but at this point it's unacceptable because you are going outside the 3SD range, or possibly the beginning of a large systemic error. Any QC result outside 3SD violate this rule, and you must stop assay and investigate to correct it. You cannot just accept the run at that point. 3, we have what we call the 2-2S. This rule in this, or this rule identifies systemic error only. The criterion for violation is 2 consecutive QC results greater than 2SD on the same side of the mean, just as you see here. That's why when people say we should scrap 1-2S rule, I tell them you are joking with a 2-2S rule violation. If while you are having 1-2S, you did not take a corrective action, you run all patient sample for that day. You say it's just outside 2SD, it doesn't matter. And you run all the patient sample for today. You come in tomorrow and it gives you another 1-2S on the same side. Then it has become a 2-2S. This is a systemic error. So what happens to all the patient results that were submitted yesterday? That means the systemic error has already started when it indicated the 1-2S. It's not when it got to the 2-2S that it started. It has already commenced at this point, but you failed to take an action because you were looking at a 1-2S as just a warning rule. It is not just a warning rule. You need to be sure that you are not, it's not the beginning of a, an unacceptable random error. That is why you need to investigate every QC out of control run. Then we have the fourth, which we call the random forced standard deviation shift, R4S. It's a random forced standard deviation. This is a random error and is violated if there are at least 4 standard deviation difference between your control values within a single run, where you are skipping 1, 2, 3, 4 standard deviation lines on your graph. You are dabbling about from one end of your graph to the other. This R4S rule is said to be violated. You cannot proceed running because your patient results are going to be in that magnitude of deviation, affecting both accuracy and precision. So you can imagine when a diagnostic decision or a serial monitoring is to be conducted based on the laboratory result that operated at this level on the 5th and on the 6th of a particular month, then you know that you are really creating trouble for the patient and no longer interested in the welfare of that patient. Then we have the 4-1S rule. This rule criteria is violated when we have 4 consecutive QC results on the same side of the mean. This is indicative of a systemic bias. They are greater than 1SD. This is your 1SD limit. This is your 1SD line. Now, all the 4 points are outside that graph, that line of that graph. At this point, please, you need to investigate because this is a systemic bias. You need to fix it. There is a problem. Even though they are still within 2SD, don't accept the run. It's telling you that there is a problem brewing up. Now, that is where a graph helps you to detect trends easily, different from when you tabulate result. If you had tabulated the result, probably you would have only been forced to act on this on the 9th. But if you had plotted it out, you would have seen that for 4 consecutive days, I have operated greater than 4SD value of my, or greater than 1SD value of my control run. And that is indicative of a systemic problem. And you say the 4-1S rule has been violated. And we have what we call the 10X rule. This rule is violated when 10 results, 10 control results are out on the same side of the mean. regardless of the standard deviation. Now, in the 41S, the result, the QC result are greater than 1SD. But in the 10X rule, they may be within 1SD. As you can see here, some of the results are within 1SD, some are greater than 1SD, only one here is greater than 2SD. So looking at this graph, you may say a 41S rule was not violated, but actually a 10X rule is violated. This becomes a concern if your initial validation of your analyzer did not reveal this problem. If when you acquire the analyzer, you were not operating on a 10X rule, then why is it moving to a bias now? You need to fix it. There is a problem systemically. However, if your validation report shows this same picture, then it may be an inherent limitation or challenge of your device. There's what we call factory defects. So your analyzer could have some factory defect in that setup of setting parameters will not, there is no amount of calibration. There is nothing you will do if we run on a bias. So in such a case, there will be no need to take an action. That is why the first thing you need to do when acquiring or deploying a method is to run a verification internally to confirm the validation performed by the manufacturer of the device. So having known those basic laws, there are several others. As I said, there can be trends. There can be T5, T9, T10. There can be, instead of 10X, some people may say, I want to do 12X, I want to do 15X, depending on what you set. You can set up any rule you want to set up. You can play with it. You are actually playing with data. Now, two things are important if you must have a defined QC protocol for your laboratory. One, you need to set up what we call maximum error detection rules and what we also refer to as minimum rejection rule. Now, maximum error rule detection rules are rules which highlight a true problem effectively, such as 13S, R4S, 41S, and 22S. My dear, the moment you are on any of these four, please stop, troubleshoot, find out the problem, fix it before you commence running patient sample. You might just be harming a patient somewhere. This is not about accreditation. This is not about compliance. This is not about a nod given to you by HEFEMA that you are participating. Now you are getting data. How do you derive or extrapolate data that can improve your managed care of patients? Then there's what we call the minimum rejection routines. You may not strangulate yourself over, but are worthy of you taking note of before it gets out of hand. Rules that eliminate false rejection. Rules like a 1,2S. If you are having a potassium, for instance, of at a concentration of 2.9 millimoles per liter, and your QC result is showing that you are outside 2SD, and what you actually got from your potassium run was 3.1. My dear, you can accept your run on that day, because at that low level of a hypokalemia, it is the same treatment the patient needs. So some people are so quick, it is out of range, let me stop running and ship to my neighboring lab. No, it's not about just shipping, but you need to look at things that will allow for minimum rejection while you detect things that highlights a true problem through this rule violation. The same thing with the 10X. Doesn't mean that you should stop running, but it's telling you that there is a problem, especially when you did not start out on that note when the method was deployed in your laboratory. Now, whatever protocol you decide on, as long as you stick to that protocol, do not change it to suit needs when your QC are out of control. I see people who say, okay, this is my protocol now. They have listed it in their procedure. And the moment the QC is on 2.01, they say, it's almost approximately 2. It's not approximately. I faced an ISO accreditation before, and we were penalized based on something like that. Our first run on on one of the effective serology quantitative test was at 2.73 SDI. A recalibration was done and a repeat QC was done, and it came to 2.01. And the scientists went ahead and accepted the patient run for that day. That 2.01 is approximately 2. And when the auditor came, she just asked a question. He said 2.0 and 2.01, which one is greater? We couldn't answer, because if you answer, you say 2.01, that means you have said you have violated the 22S rule violation. Then why did you accept patient sample? We were now approximately. Please do not approximate. Whatever your protocols are, stand by it. You have chosen the protocol to run. That brings us to laboratory errors, sources, and identification. Laboratory, laboratory errors, sources, and identification. As I stated earlier, as long as you have human beings in your lab, there will be errors. As long as you are dealing with machines, even your car that brought you to office today may not respond when you want to go home. So errors occur. So you need to trace what those errors are, where they come from. How do you identify them? Because I always say, if you cannot identify them, you cannot fix them. A lot of people are looking at the EQA graph. They are not seeing anything. The only thing they are seeing is within 2SD. There's no way you'll be able to fix any problem that's going to compromise the patient's safety. There are two basic type of error which you should be used to by this time in the laboratory, particularly the analytic phase, which is random error and the systemic error. Under random error, this is when an occasional result is outside control limit, either too high or too low, e.g. one result outside the plus or minus 2 SD, like a 1 2s, that's a random error. Systemic error, on the other hand, is said to occur when you're seeing a consistent and always too high or too low, like what you see in your 22S. If you continue running, it remains at that level. That has become a systemic error. There is something that have gone wrong in your setup. You need to go back, trace it out, and correct it. Then early warning signs that you must build into your system to allow you detect when issues are arising, when there are deviations to the ideal pattern of distribution that no longer obey the distribution we have under the Gaussian distribution curve. We help you to really promptly resolve issue before the results of patients start going outside the acceptable limit. Two situations to look out for. Two key things are shifts and trends. Shift, simply put, means an identifiable change to its EG, such as a standard way calibrator, whereas a trend is a gradual change. You not really pick it, but gradually your result is changing its reliability, especially as it relates to things like deterioration of control loaded on the instrument analyzers. For trends, which are subtle and indicative of gradual loss of reliability, the causes normally are: one, deterioration of the instrument light source or light filter integrity. If the light is gradually dying, but good enough, most of the analyzers we have these days, once the voltage drop is sudden, so you rarely have such problem. But if you're still using some of the old analyzers, you experience this a lot. The light intensity keeps dropping in intensity, or the light filter integrity gets compromised as with time or age. Then you begin to notice a gradual trend, either descending or ascending on your QC. At such a point, you need to correct the cause of that problem. It can also be caused by gradual accumulation of debris in the sample or reagent tube. This is very common in hematology analyzers, or where cells are lysed, deproteinized to measure the red cell hemoglobin component on a day-to-day basis. That's why you have the uh, hypochlorite solution, which you use as your cleaning solution. The purpose of this is to solubilize the debris on the tube, because by the time you have too much debris on the tube, you find that the cells of particular size will not be able to pass through again, and you begin to have a lower count of your cells. They could also trend can also be caused by gradual deterioration of electrodes, where you still have electrode system in measuring your test. If the electrode is deteriorating, you might begin to notice some trends. Aging of the reagents. Reagents on board are not meant to last till the shelf life expiration. There are two expiry dates in the lab. There's what we call the shelf life. That is the expiry date written on the pack. There's also, once you open that reagent, go through the package insert method sheet written by the manufacturer. Every reagent, once opened, no longer, most reagent, I will not say every, almost all reagent no longer stays to the shelf life again. There is now an open vial stability period given. So your expiration will now be shorter because you have opened it and put into use. You need to be conversant with those two procedures. If they are reagents you load on your analyzers, please take the time out to check when they are expired, especially when your system does not auto notifies you that the onboard expiration had been exceeded. But if it does, then fine. Some analyzers will ask you to replace, some will ask you to recalibrate and continue. It is your QC performance post that calibration that will determine whether you should continue running that test or not, or you should throw away the reagent. Then sometimes gradual loss and deterioration of the control material can also lead to a trend. You are using control beyond the PS life, the piercing event given or recommended by the manufacturer. You most likely, excuse me, you most likely going to have some challenge also with your control showing a downward trend. Then there is the gradual deterioration of incubation chamber temperature. This is where you have your peltiers that heat up the mixture of your reagent and your sample, especially in chemistry analyzers. There is a heating up that takes place between the peltier. So if that incubation temperature is, if the peltier is losing its heating capacity, you also see it in your QC run, dropping as a trend. Then we also have shifts, which are abrupt changes in control patterns. They were moving in one direction, all of a sudden, it started running at a higher point or at a lower point, and now remained at that point. Shifts in QC data present is sudden and dramatic positive or negative change in the test system performance, and they could be caused by sudden failure in change in light source, change in reagent formulation, because there are some new formulations, but good enough, most manufacturers of reagents are now coming up with its accompanying control a calibrator material, such that new formulations will require a new formulation of calibrator also. If not, new formulation most of the time can produce a shift. Changes in reagent or calibrator or control lot can also cause this. Then major instrument maintenance after performing maintenance, not what we call servicing, not the one that one engineer will come loose and just grease some part, clean some part, and he said that's major maintenance. Those are servicings. Those are not maintenances. Maintenances entails replacement of certain components of the instrument. And where there are major replacements of components to ensure that it's rejuvenated and works as if it's brand new, if you don't recalibrate, you will be having shifts in your QC run. That's why after major maintenances, you should recalibrate all parameters. Don't just run and say you are trying to save cost. You are interested in patient safety. Please take your time and recalibrate all parameter. It won't cost you anything. Sudden changes in incubation or instrument temperature. Instrument temperature could also call that change in room temperature or humidity. Laboratories that the ACs are faulty, their generators are faulty, and they have to open the window for the natural air, allowing dust, heat of the environment. Let me tell you, those equipment were manufactured in cold temperature region. So when they say room temperature, what the manufacturer meant as room temperature is between 15 and 25 degrees centigrade. What we have as room temperature in this part of the world can be less than 34, 35. And some days, it can be as high as 42 degrees centigrade. So you see the damaging effect the temperature has. And that's why we have air conditioned system where we keep our laboratory equipment. If you are feeling too cold, please don't switch off the AC. Go and get a laboratory coat, get extra suit to keep yourself warm, because you might be affecting the performance of the instrument that we produce shift, especially hematology analyzers. Then other things that may cause shift are failures in the sampling or reagent dispensing system. If you are having the probe is no longer aspirating, there is a plug, there is a clog, there is a microfiber clog that have plugged the sample probe. You're going to have a shift because the little quantity that was absorbed will end up giving you very high result when mixed with the patient, with the reagent. Inaccurate and ineffective calibrations. Calibrators that needs to be frozen for it to be viable for 3 months are not frozen, and the people are still using it at refrigeration temperature up to the 3rd month. That calibration you're going to be performing is ineffective. It will never give you the desired result. Sometimes a newly employed staff who have not been trained, or a staff that has been stressed out, may also, in the process of being stressed out, may end up programming the wrong thing, or make a random error that will lead to a shift. That is why you, as a manager, you should also look at the well-being of your staff. If you notice somebody is stressed, sometimes you need to advise them to take leave. Poorly reconstituted control materials or reagents. Some labs still have reagents be reconstituted. You need to be extra careful while reconstituting. But most reagents these days come ready for use, just for you to shake or mix and upload on your system. So these are some of the things that cause shift in your run. Then another major issue you might encounter in your lab is what we call a bias. A bias, simply put, is defined as inaccuracy. That is, your results are definitely not in agreement with the target or consensus value, being either too high or too low, though may not necessarily be outside the 2SD, just as we stated in the 41S rule and the 10X rule. So the dreaded 10X rule on the same side of the mean issue is an example. A bias not inherently present from the validation exercise must be investigated before making any drastic statistical change. But if it was there from the onset, don't bother yourself making any calculation. It requires a consistent change to alter accuracy to the level whereby a bias is defined. Look for that consistent change. You'll be able to get where it started from. Some of the other common sources I identified in EQA report I see a lot of people have problem when they run their EQ and the result is out, and they begin to perform maintenance, strip down the equipment. The equipment is not generating result. Why they had not reconstituted or even mixed the sample properly? For instance, you run an EQA and all the parameters are running higher than 3SD. It shows that you have under diluted, or everything is running greater than minus 3SD. It shows that you have over diluted. So if you did not reconstitute properly, you're going to have problem with your QC. It's the source of error. If you did not mix properly, like the hematology material, if you don't mix it properly, you're not supposed to shake. You're supposed to mix with the palm in bad and not on roller mixer. Those are some of the things that could cause inaccurate result or errors in your reporting. Did you follow the sample instruction properly? Some people claim to know too much. Don't worry, at every point in time you're analyzing, look at the protocol again. Look at what it's saying. Your attention may just be drawn to something you have inherently not been adhering to over time. Another case is transcription errors during result submission. Some people are so overconfident. I will never make a mistake. I have submitted results and I found that I've made mistake in submitting before. Sometimes you might need to go back and look at the result again. Uh, when we submit results, we get a notification that results have been submitted. Sometimes I go back, take the raw data, start comparing this already submitted result to be sure that there was no error. If there is, then I go back and make the correction. Inadequate number of participants. Sometimes the number of participants, especially when we talk about effective EQA, it shouldn't be less than 20. So when you are having less than that, there will be a caution on that report telling you that this is for information only. You should treat with caution. So don't begin to overreact when you are only 4 participants using that particular methodology or that instrument, because it may just be that the participants level is not sufficient. So in such a time, rather than looking at the instrument stat, you might need to compare the method stats, because there are other instruments that also use similar methodologies. You might need to use that in your review. Are your documentations adequate? Is there adequate and effective communication about laboratory personnel of actions taken? I've seen the QC, internal control particularly, being out. Somebody carries out a corrective action, did not document it. The next person comes in the next shift, picks it up and start acting on it again, just wasting resources because there are no documentation. Then at the end of the month, when it is time to review EQC, there are no actions through the entire course of the month. There is no way you'll be able to fix your problems. First of all, I say you must be able to identify the problem before you talk of fixing. As we run close to the closing stages, I want to look at reviewing EQA report correctly. As I said, a lot of people pick EQA report and they don't really know what to look out for. And the only thing a lot of people know is my result within 2SD. Even if it is on 1.99 SDI, they say I am fine. You are not fine. If you have not been operating in that region, why are you accepting 1.99? You've been running on less than 1 in the past 10 months. Why do you want to accept 1.99 in this 11th month? That is where you need to understand what to look out for in the reviewing of EQA reports. So, number 1, look at your SDI, your standard deviation index. That is your relative position, the position of your own result within the standard deviation for data used in calculating that peer review for your laboratory or that test method. It is a current reflection of your performance at that time. It is not fixed. It doesn't mean that your lab remains in that position all through the month. It is at the time of assay. So if your report is being reviewed 2 weeks after it was released, please go back and check again. with the same EQA material, whether you are still in that same position before you say there is no need for action. That is why most EQA body gets their report out within 3 days, 3 to 4 days now, so that it will be a current review, not post-dated. Number two, look out for unacceptable patterns. Now, after looking at your current run, also look back. How have you been performing? How is your current run in relation with the previous result? That's where you begin to look for trends. That's where you begin to look for shifts. That's where you begin to look for biases. Because if you don't fix these trend shifts and biases, those are the ones that are going to lead to your SDI being out in the next or subsequent runs. Look out for them and nip them in the bud before they begin to affect your patient run. Is your performance concentration dependent? Maybe your linearity of measurement, your instrument cannot detect at that concentration. That's why it's not giving an accurate result. If it is that, then there's no need. You cannot make the machine, especially when you are using a POCT. You can't make it to perform better than its capacity. So you need to know the low detection limit and the upper detection limit of every parameter on your analyzer. So when you are at that high limit or that low limit, whether you like it or not, at those curves on the calibration, at those ranges in your calibration curve, your result will not be precise. And sometimes accuracy will be impeded. So it's not, that's why some people will say, I've recalibrated it severally. It's not improving because it's within the upper region of the measuring range of your analyzer. Then look at your IQC also. Is the IQC showing similar picture? If IQC is showing a similar picture, then you know that you have a systemic problem. It's not only affecting the EQA, it's affecting IQA, and it's invariably affecting patient results. But if the picture is not showing on the IQC, your IQC look very fine, then you need to go back and look at your coefficient of variation, because that is your true margin of error, which should not be greater than the biologic variation limit set for that parameter for percentage imprecisions. So it's not just looking at your IQC, are they within 2SD? What really measures the effectiveness or the precision of your internal QC is what we call the coefficient of variation, which is your standard deviation divided by your mean times 100/1. That tells you the margin of error in your system. Then, are you registered with the correct details? Some people have registered wrong details and they are always carrying corrective troubleshooting actions. Check your methodology. Go to the package insert. Many people don't like reading. They don't pick package insert method from the manufacturer. They don't compare. When they are registering for their EQA program, they never ask for help. Which methodology is this? They feel they know everything. Take time out and ask for help where you are not sure. Don't just pick the one closest in answer to it. Then also look at, is the program effective? Are there adequate participants? Is the EQA giving you concentration of samples within the cycle that covers from the low to high, or everything is just the same concentration all through the year? Is the EQA proficiency test provider accredited or pursuing accreditation? Because they also have accreditation, ISO accreditation on their own limit. A standard body that has accreditation will know how to present reports to you. So you don't just pick anybody because of the cost implication. Quality can sometimes cost you something extra. And there's a common saying that quality will price will long be quality will long be remembered when price has been forgotten. You will forget the price when you are getting the benefits, the quality out of your EQA. But when you are not getting the quality, then that's when you'll be talking about pricing. Then if you look at EQA report these days, there are several other instruments and methods that are provided as extra information by the proficiency test body. Some will tell you the best 10 performance equipment and will give you their results. Now, those things are not to tell you that those equipments are good. They are not just telling you to display, or they are not trying to display it on the report for you to see. They are trying to tell you, in case you're having problem with your methodology or your instrument, and you intend to change your instrumentation or your method, these are some of the ones you might want to consider if you want to be top notch when it comes to quality result delivery. This brings us to the closing stages now. Early detection of drifts ensures prevention of patient harm. I just picked a few graphs to show you some things. I'm not going to the detail of any laboratory result. I'm not showing you any lab result, but I just want to pick some result from the RICAS program for us to see. Uh, if you look at the graphs here, we have hematocrit and the hemoglobin here. If you look at the distribution, this is actually an ideal distribution. The closer you are to the mean, the more accurate you are. The farther you are from the mean, the less accurate you are. So you see that of this, for this laboratory, all the results over this series of months are within the 1SD range. This is high accuracy. And if you look at the closeness of each point to each other, with the exception of this that is this wide, you will see that they are very close to each other. Where you have closeness of results to each other, then that is good precision. This is an example of high accuracy, high precision. The same thing here. This is another very good example, with the exception of this, which is this can be regarded as a 1-2S rule violation because it was corrected next month. I went auditing a lab in South Africa some years ago, and I saw their electrolyte analyzer EQA. Everything was just around the mean. I said, wow, this is fantastic. I never believed a laboratory can attain that level of accuracy until I saw it in practice. If you do the right maintenance, you calibrate when you need to calibrate, you replace reagent when you need to replace, my dear, you will operate perfectly, as you can see in this graph. Then I also picked some of interest. Platelet, for instance. Yes, with the exception of this, for instance, this is not a rule violation yet. But this tells you that there is a problem. You have never operated at this level when you were here. So you see, there is a problem here. You might need, yes, you might not need to stop assay, but you might need to investigate, why am I running high? Is the platelet bath clogged? Does it need maintenance, cleaning? Then if you look at the set of data here, these 7 points are closer to each other than this set of data. Precision is low here and precision is higher here. These are some of the things you need to take note of while reviewing your EQA. So there is something, yes, you are accurate, but precision is not on point here. The precision could be better. And that is exactly what you've achieved. If you did not fix this, who knows, the next run may even find its way outside the graph, as we shall see in one of the examples very soon. Then this is another example for the activated partial thromboplastin time. You see, the points here have excellent precision. These points here actually nullifies the bias. Because of these 3 runs, you can't say this is a positive bias. So these 3 points nullifies this bias. So we still have good accuracy and good precision. But if you look at this graph also, there was a problem here. If you see, the points are a bit loose, moving up, coming down, coming down, going up. So where you have precision issues, you need to look at what are you missing out? What are you not doing correctly? Check your IQC. Is it showing the same picture? Don't just use 2SD as acceptable, because it's already outside 2SD, as you can see on this occasion. And also on this occasion, it's already outside 2SD. But if you can maintain, and it takes a definite conscious act of reagent viability and in use of calibrator, equipment maintenance performed correctly and at the right time, weekly, daily, monthly, 2 monthly, 3 monthly, 6 monthly, yearly, as it is, you need to ensure that each of those maintenances are done correctly. My mentor once said, when she looked at my EQA some years ago, she said maintenances are not being done. That's why your graphs are scattered for magnesium and phosphate. I looked at her and I was wondering, I said, how can you? My maintenance chart are all ticked. My scientists are doing what's expected of them. It was when we got a qualified engineer, I realized that people just tick the boxes without even knowing what maintenance procedure or how it needs to be performed. So please, when you look at graph, don't just say you are within 2SD. Look at the pattern. Look backwards. How has been the trend? Is it showing anything significant that you need to take note of and be wary of? Then if you look at total protein here, yes, your results is almost beneath the mean. This is very accurate. But if you look at this result, precision was great here. Precision is being restored here. But if you look at the middle, there is a problem with precision here. This most likely are issues with your water quality, issues with maintenance, issues with reagents on board over a 6-7 month period. So don't just look at it and say, they are still within, they are going to, the degree at which they vary from each other and away from the mean is the degree your patient results vary from the mean and also disagree with each other in your IQC. So from your EQA report, I can tell you how your IQC will look like, because I can deduce accuracy and precision from this single graph. Then for the AST, this is one of the liver function enzyme. It's the same thing. You see good precision here. You go see good precision. Yes, all the results are within 2SD. But if you look here, there is a problem with your precision. You're moving, the gap is widening. It comes back. It goes up. It comes down. This is not a good precision. You need to take action here. If you don't take action here, you will deviate from this. The closer you are to the mean and the closer your points are to each other is a measure of how accurate and how precise you are. Then ALT is showing the same picture. You see another very good. Everything here is within 2SD. Up to this point, the precision is excellent, high precision. But when you come here, you begin to see, look at the gap. Then it begins to drop. This is an example of poor precision. Precision is your system is losing precision. That means you are drifting away from the acceptable quadrant of high precision to low precision. Your accuracy may still be there, but your precision is dropping. Then the last graph here, you see yourself for like in CKMB mass, you are on the mean all through from the beginning of the year to the end of the year. Do not rejoice over this. It simply shows that the only participant using that instrument or that method. So you might need to go and get another instrument to review your performance with. You might need to pick another standard instrument of measurement with which you compare your result. The same thing is applicable. I will not be able to go into that. The same is applicable to blood banking EQA, to molecular, where the insert will tell you that when the CT values are above 38, that's when you count them as positive. And by the time you begin to use EQA program, you see that the acceptable CT values for positive is less than 38. It's between 35 and 36. Anything above that is considered non-reactive. So these are just some of the example of things you pick from the graph. There are several information. If you look at the right class graph, if you look at there are 4 graphical presentation. The first one is the Levi-Jennings, which is the most important one. The second one tells you about your target score. Then the third one talks about your percentage deviation from the mean. Then the fourth one talks about concentration. Then it tells you whether your instrument is able to measure as low or as high as the concentration being measured. These are some of the things you derive when you contact the distributor or the supplier or the vendor of those EQA program. In conclusion, as laboratories face increasing demands, I did not put increased. They are actually increasing because by the day we get calls from clinicians, this result is not correct. We get calls from patients. We say the patient that tells us why our results are wrong. Because it's therefore the demand for accuracy is increasing. As laboratories face increasing demand for accuracy, compliance, and patient safety, the importance of participation in external quality assessment programs cannot be overemphasized, and therefore has never been more important than this age we find ourselves. My dear, my simple advice to you is that you cannot afford to be left behind. If you are left behind, you might just be given the results that you will tell the patient that is what the machine gives me. And if you are on that level in this dispensation, then I can only say thanks for listening. I cannot help you. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, sir. This was really beautiful. We have 2 questions from the chat box first, so we'll take that. So the first question is what of a situation where the QC material itself is faulty?
Okay, thank you so much. I love that question. I've also gotten a EQA material before and I found that they were faulty. That is why I mentioned, let me just go back to that slide, that you need to look at the performance of your IQC alongside. Don't just look at your EQA to make drastic decisions. If you look at the run and you feel you have calibrated or you've taken the corrective action and it's still not showing a good performance, take a previous sample. You see, most people just run EQA and they discard. When you finish running EQA, aliquot into a Pendorf tube and put them in a pouch, freeze them up. They are excellent troubleshooting materials. So if this particular maybe cycle 6, sample number 6 is not giving me a good result, I can go back to 5. I can go back to 4. I'll bring the frozen material out, thaw and run. And if it gives me the correct result, that means this current batch of material, EQA material I'm asking, is faulty. Then I will still accept my patient sample based on acceptability of the previous runs. That is the previous EQA. So if the EQA material is faulty, you will also detect it just as if your internal control material are faulty. Do a recheck or ask from a neighboring lab, a lab that you are associated with. You can ask, can you please help me with an aliquot? Then you know whether you have your sample in your custody is compromised. I've had cases that I've had to ask for replacement before, and I was giving good replacements from the proficiency test body. You bought something, so if it's not in good order, complain to the vendor. I
Okay,
hope
thank
that
you, sir.
okay.
That's all I was asked. I hope that question has been answered, Mr. Antonio. Then the next question is what if you have 10x within 1 SD? Is that okay?
As I said, it's okay if it's most especially if it was not there when you started using the method in your lab, when you implemented the machine. But if everything is within 1 SD. Let me, I think we had one very good example in these graphs here. For instance, this is an example of 10x within 1SD, with the exception of these two that are slightly on the border. This is an example of a 10x rule. It's acceptable. So the goal is you want to get the bullseye, which is this line, which is the mean. This is the measure of your accuracy. If I always tell my scientists that strive to be within the white region. That's the excellent. In fact, if you are on the mean, it's excellent. If you are within the white space, it's very good. If you are within the pink region, it's still good. But by the time you are falling outside there, you're already poor. So 10x rule is acceptable. But it simply tells you that something is brewing. If you can detect it and fix it easily, you will come back to, after all, it was possible to run on the mean here, to run on the mean here, to run close to the mean. What stops these ones from coming back to the mean? So there are things within your analytical system that you could control to bring these performances down. Those are the tasks you should have to prosecute in your lab. I can
Thank you,
see a
sir.
hand. Yeah, thanks, man. I can see hand lifted of Pascal.
Okay.
Pascal, you can go on with your question.
The donor needs to unmute him.
Kindly unmute.
Hello.
Okay,
Yes, I have done that.
go ahead.
Good morning, good afternoon, everybody. Please. So,
Sir.
yes, my question is: thank you so much for your wonderful presentation, Mr. James. So,
Thanks so much.
I want to ask a question in connection with the last one you answered regarding deteriorated or bad EQA sample.
Material, yeah.
Okay, EQA material. So, how would you know if you have a bad EQA material? How would you know that this is bad, apart from when the result, before the result is released?
Okay, so I would say you should have an internal protocol of shipment, how you receive your shipment from the proficiency test body. Most proficiency test body we use in Nigeria are actually based abroad, and they ship in their materials to us. You must ensure the cold chain is maintained. You must have a tracking number to know when it arrives, not that it has slept 2 weeks, 3 weeks at the port before you realize that you have not gotten your material. And the moment you get the material and you notice that your ice packs are completely thawed and is at an oven temperature, immediately send an email to the vendor. Let him or her be prepared for a replacement. Tell them I will still go ahead to process. However, if the result doesn't turn out, I will request for a replacement. Put it in writing. It's your right. You paid for it for whatever reason. If they never communicated the exact date of arrival to you, and it's not any fault of yours that it stayed outside, then you receive the material. At that point, you refrigerate, you reconstitute, you run. There is no way you will know until the result is out. Until the assessment, that's when you will know whether your result is your result is compromised. I had a recent experience like that on internal QC, and I was affecting my quality. I had to stop running patient sample until this affected the reagent, not just control material. Because by the time I used the internal control, I used the external control, everything was failing. So at that point, I had to outsource until I got a new set of reagents. So don't say it has not been delivered to me. I see vendors, we send their subjects to bring materials and control to the lab. And in Nigeria today, a vendor is still moving with polythene bag with one. In fact, they use pure water sachet nylon with ice as ice pack. Those things really attract water of condensation. rather than the ice packs, which is actually a gel that doesn't get wet. That's why you see when the delivery is not meeting standard, reject it at that point. Communicate with your vendor, tell them to improve their shipment. But if it is a factory defect, if you complain to the EQA provider, they will replace it. I've had a case before with CD4 years back. The result came, I said this EQA material is faulty because I got a very poor performer. I said, I went troubleshooting, I repeated it, cleaned the machine, did the maintenance. I laid hand on the previous sample and I was on point. I told the vendor, I wrote an email. I said, use your EQA material is compromised. The man was arguing with me. I didn't argue with him again. I kept quiet. I continued running my patients because I knew I was accurate and precise. In a month after that EQA report was released, that man sent me an email and apologized that something was actually wrong with the sample, that other lab also pinpointed it. And he gave me a free replacement. See, for the fact that the person did not agree with you at that point in time shouldn't stop you from requesting for what you deserve. If you've paid for it, you deserve to get it in good condition. If you're not getting it, request for a replacement. Even if it is Rikers, they are here and they are hearing you, they will replace it for you. I hope I answered your question, Pascal.
Yes, thank you so much.
Welcome.
Okay,
Please
thank
feel
you,
free.
sir. I have one more question.
Go ahead.
Okay, so is it okay to run for only high volume tests? I'll leave it for you to answer. Like to run EQA for only high volume tests.
Yeah, this comes you see, I could not really put because the ISO standard is actually a regulated document. You need to purchase in your name to have it. So there's no way I can put the whole thing. Now, being on an EQA program doesn't mean that your lab has to be bankrupt. You don't need to go and take a World Bank loan because you want to run EQA program. They are not cheap. By the time you are dealing with them in foreign currency, you know that this is quite substantial amount of money. So you pick programs that are liable to give impact patients significantly. For the ones that you may not be able to afford, then there are other methodologies of comparisons. Interlab comparison, the ISO standard allows. For instance, I'm running specific protein and or immunoassay program, and there is one program, one of the parameter I needed to run, they told me it's on a different program. It's on the specialized immunoassay program, and that's going to cost me almost another $6,000. I don't have that money. So what I will do, I would rather compare with another laboratory, or I will have different lots of the calibrator because calibrators are made from purified materials. Freeze them, aliquot and freeze calibrators of different lot so that you don't use the same lot of calibrator to check a run on a current analyzer. You will be misled, because if you call somebody to set an exam, he's not going to set an exam that he will fail. So use different lot of calibrator to check. You can compare with other labs, but you need to now understand the principle of data, because if you are not be able to detect trends, you are not able to statistically compute your data, you may not know when to take an action when dealing with a test that you don't have an EQA program covering. So it can be very dicey. But if you can pull labs together, associations, so that you could share amongst yourself, fine, and ensure that the sample gets to them in the appropriate condition and in a timely manner, that will also be great. So you are free to use interlab comparisons.
Okay. Thank you very much, sir. Do we have any more questions before we round up, please? Okay, if you have questions, just drop it on the chat box. So, Mr. James has told you you need to run EQA, and And I'm here to tell you that, yes, you need to run EQA and why you must run recast. Okay, Mr. Obin, I see your hand up, but can you put your question in the chat box and then we'll get back to you. So, because we're rounding up. Okay, so quickly, I'll just show you why you need to run recast. And for some of you who are already on the recast platform, I'm sure Mr. James has shown you that it's not just check what your, oh, I passed, and did you pass well? Like I always post on the platform, I said, your QC passed for the day. Did you push your QC to pass, or did your QC pass well, or did it just pass by the whiskers and all that? So Mr. James has shown you today that not all passing is actually passing. And if you're setting exams for yourself, you would be very happy when you pass recast, but are you setting exams for yourself? Are you writing exams alone? If you're only one person in a class, even if you scored 0/100, you still come first. But are all first positions first positions? I think Mr. James has answered that. So why do you need to do recast or continue using my recast programs? Is because we have a lot of programs you can avail yourself of: chemistry, hematology, immunoassay, blood typing, cardiac markers, a whole lot of programs that you can select from. And it is yearly. I think it's a yearly program. You get 12 samples. Apart from microbiology that you don't get 12 samples, other programs 12 samples. Some persons who are maybe very cautious or conscious of quality, some people run twice a month. Some persons run twice a month, that's bi-weekly, but you're still going to get your 12 is a monthly process. So, or like some EQAs that run maybe 6 times, or maybe they run once in a quarter and stuff. So what happens to your patient results within the few months that you've not run EQA? What happens those period? So for us, some people know it that some people say request, RICAS, and also it's actually recast. So we have that's Randolph's International Quality Assessment Scheme. It's one of the world's largest EQA. I think as of today we have over 6,000 participants worldwide that are on the platform. So why is recast your preferred choice? Like I said, it's highly consolidated, it's flexible, and user-friendly reports, especially now we've moved to um the new website. Reports turnaround time is quick, 72 hours, you get your report. And it is friendly in the sense that you can, if you don't, it's quite understandable. Like you can explain your results, can look at, even if you may not know the detailed explanation, but you can still pick up a few things from the reports you're seeing. So you have frequent reporting, so you can detect errors, not like the ones that maybe you submit and before you get your results, it comes at maybe a month time or 2 months time or something. What happens to your patient results that period? And of course, we're ISO accredited. So you'll be saving costs in the sense that for one recast program, you can run it on 5 instruments. Example, biochemistry, can run chemistry on Beckman, Roche, Abbott, EBA, Mindray. If you have all the instruments in your lab, you can run it. And also, if you have different sites, maybe you have one site here in Okbebi, you can that is using EBA. The other site there is using maybe Mindray. You can run on just different analyzers so that you to compare results. So you are allowed to put up to 5 instruments on per program. And then all our samples from EQA to our IQC, which are third-party controls, all of them are 100% human samples. So they relate clinically to patient samples, and they are high quality samples. So they span across clinically relevant levels from very low level. Mr. James talk about concentration. So some analyzers cannot pick very low, or maybe because of your own internal QC material. Have you ever checked it? Can your QC material pick very low concentration, like maybe low TSH, ultra low PSAs, and all? So our EQA samples, they span across clinically relevant levels from the very low to the very high levels that you not even imagine, where you start questioning, could it be, do you want to dilute, do you want to do this, do you want to do that? So our samples span across those clinically relevant levels. So it's highly consolidated. So you need to you don't need to start you don't need to start doing this, doing that. If you look at our chemistry, some of our chemistry tests, I'm not saying you should not come and buy amino acid from you, but some of our chemistry can actually run some amino acid a bit. It depends on how you tweak it or specific to your instrument. But it's cost saving. Less time is spent to manage multiple EPA program providers. But we will give you everything all in one. You can just buy maybe all the programs together and all. And you have a more efficient workflow, because your time, you can just put it on the calendar, okay, this is when I'm supposed to run my EQA, and also you program it into your usual lab workflow. Sorry. So it's I talked about consolidation. So for example, there are some EQA programs that owe you chemistry, might split chemistry into different levels. Maybe you might even need to buy electrolytes separately, or for immunoassay, you need to buy tumor markers separately. But both for our EQA and for our IKC, our tumor markers are consolidated with immunoassay. So you don't have a different tumor marker control or a different maybe hormonal control, tumor marker separately. Everything is consolidated into one as immunoassay. So it saves you cost of buying tumor marker separately and maybe hormonal separately and all. So that's the consolidation. So it's to reduce cost and reduce time for you. It's flexible, so it's cost effective. You have greater accessibility for even small labs with specialized tests, or no matter the size of your lab, it accommodates everybody, and you'll be able to scale up your participation in tests as the testing requirements involve. So if you're increasing your test, you don't need to say, okay, I need to buy this specially, except, like Mr. James mentioned, some very specific tests that are not maybe incorporated into the general test. But most of the tests are highly consolidated into the test. So maybe, as for example, you now say, okay, well, I started running tumor markers. You don't need to start buying tumor markers separately. Just use your immunoassay because material and run your tumor marker. Oh yes, I've started running thyroid. Go ahead. Still the same thing. You don't need to get a different control material for that. So we have, like I said, we have a lot of participants as at let me say January, don't know. I think we have over 76,000. I think this number has increased last I checked, and over 139 countries. So that gives us a wider peer group, and you have more confidence in your results that, okay, yes, I can beat my chest and say, yes, I'm participating with people from over 100 countries worldwide. And our results, we are not just paying you based on Africa or so, it's worldwide. Your group, so you have a large peer group comparison. As you see how your reports come, methods, instruments. So you even see the number of persons that are using your method and your instrument worldwide. So the software, especially the new one we have now, is user friendly. Your reports, you can easily see what your results are at a glance using your LJ chart, the target score chart. You have a detailed statistical analysis done for you with in-depth performance, like to check your performance review. and then you can use it to action your reports. Can even use it to action both your IPC. So from the knowledge you have from here, you can also use it that way as well. So it supports continuous improvement in your quality control processes, both IPC and externally. Rapid reports on around time. You get your reports 24 to 72 hours as long as you've submitted your reports. And even if you submitted a blank report for that month, maybe you're not running sample for that, you still get the results that you can say, okay, maybe this is what you have. So maybe, just maybe, if you have a sample some other time also, you can use it to still compare and say this is it. So whether you don't return a result, you still see a result that you're supposed to, what your group had, what your instruments had, we still provide you with that, even though it's come as N as no result, and it's come in 72 hours, except maybe most people sometimes they give allowance, maybe people didn't submit results or something happened, there was maybe delay in delivery of samples, or they can extend, which you usually get notified. So it's important for you to get this in so you can take immediate corrective actions when necessary, because you're not just running EQA, as Mr. James said, for your certification or whatever. It also relates to patient results. So if your EQA is failing and your IPC is passing, somehow you need to know what's going on and then know how to relate that to your patient sample. So it will help you take immediate corrective action, reduce risk, because in the end, everything is patient-centered. Then you maintain compliance with accreditation requirements. I've had people say recast is too strict because we give you a timeline and all. That is because we've also had people who have forgotten that they bought EQA materials. I don't know how you spend so much money buying something like this and you forget to run, and then you give you an allowable time to run at will. That's not, I don't think that's actually nice. Or some people will say, oh no, which class is too strict, anything below 2SD is a fail, no, we need to do a rerun. I don't think you have an opportunity. If you release a poor result and maybe the patient died, you may not have an opportunity to recall the result and rerun and wake the patient up and say, no, it was an error. I feel when it comes to patients, we should be precise, and we should try to be as accurate as possible. So it also ensures ongoing quality improvement without unnecessary delays. So frequent reporting will help you also detect early errors and all. So you have timely corrective options which can be effected before issues escalate, and then you have continuous monitoring. Like Mr. James said, when you look at this month, what happened here, this month, what happened here, it helps you have a continuous monitoring process there, and then it enhances laboratory performance and reliability. You can beat your chest. Maybe someone comes and harasses you and says, okay, this report is questionable and stuff. If you know what Mr. James is one of the few persons I know that if someone comes to say, okay, this result is this, I think on a few occasions I've visited him and I've seen him say, no, I know what this is correct. This is correct. That's because he knows the processes he has put in place. He's sure of his IQC, he's sure of his EQA, and then he's correlating the two. So that means he's able to defend his results wherever it is. And some a few other persons that I know, they've been able to they can defend your result wherever it is. You're not shaky that, oh, maybe someone comes to you and say, yeah, this result is questionable, and you'll be able to defend your result. Say, no, my EQA passed, my IQC is on point and all. And you'll be able to see that it's not just passing, you're passing correctly. So you'll be able to defend yourself. And then there's increased patient safety. There's this piece that comes with patients coming to your facility and tell you that, oh, I traveled to UK, and the same results you gave me was what we had there, and I was feeling so happy that, oh, Nigeria, we did the same thing. Those things actually help boost your confidence. And someone to say, oh, when I traveled out, the results people gave me was completely different from what they had there. You start thinking, did I do something wrong here and all? But there's that confidence that comes when you know that, yes, what you're doing is correct. So like Mr. James said, for you to know a good EQA provider, it needs to be internationally accredited. So we are ISO accredited and we comply with global standards for credibility. And then, like I said, it gives you that confidence that whatever the EQA material you're using is internationally accredited. So I did mention about cost savings on registration. So you are allowed to register up to 5 instruments per program at no extra cost. So you still get results for those instruments. You get reports for each of the analytes you have registered on those instruments. So if you like have different multiple instruments, like as long as up to 5, you can register it per program there and you get reports individually for them at no extra cost. So we have high quality samples spanning across clinically relevant levels. So like Mr. James pointed out, you see maybe sometimes you get very high sample levels, get very low, you get the normal, and also it just spans across. It's not just getting high levels at all time or low levels at all times. So it spans across so you can relate them to patients. So it's realistic, reliable, accurate performance, and then you have the important thing is just having that confidence that at the end you might be saving a life, and also at the end whatever you are producing from your lab, you go to bed sleeping. Lab managers can go to bed and you fall asleep smoothly knowing that whatever is going on in your lab can be defended anywhere in the world. Thank you very much for listening. And I hope that you got 1 or 2 things from what we have portrayed here. So if you still have questions, okay, I've seen some questions here saying what is the difference between validation, correlation, precision study, and what role does the EQA and IQC play in each of these quality precisions? Mr. James, are you still here?
Fully. So just as you have ISO standard for laboratory practice, you also have ISO standard for proficiency test body, which Chiamaka has shared with us. There's also an ISO standard for instrumentations, manufacturers of instruments. So what that simply means is that any Tom, Dick, and Harry cannot jump into producing an equipment that can be used as a standard methodology, except certain conditions are met. And after meeting those conditions, they will do what we call a validation exercise. That means they're going to compare their instrument performance for certain tests using different method with already established methodologies. That is why in their insert or what you may call the information for use for that analyzer, you will see things like precision, you see things like correlation. Now, the precision is telling you that if they run the same sample on that analyzer over and over again, the deviation cannot be more than 0.015%, for instance. They are telling you that their system is reproducible, it's reliable. They have also run, if for instance, it's a new machine coming out, they have compared it with the big boys in the industry, the Abbotts, the Beckman, the Roaches. They have compared it and they are telling you the regression analysis. You see something like R is equal to MX plus C. They are telling you that is their correlation coefficient. It's reflected as R. They are telling you how well their own method compare with the big known machine in the industry. That's why I say they also have their modalities for their ISO, their own ISO accreditation. Now, when you purchase that equipment, you cannot completely rely on what the manufacturer claim is. You need now to do what we call an internal verification of the manufacturer's claim. So most of the time, though, people interchange and use the terms interchangeably. They say I'm doing a validation. You are actually doing a verification, because a validation is a detailed experiment where you'll be having up to not less than 40 to 100 samples. You're not going to use that. If you use 20 that covers the analytical range, you can accept your verification report for your analyzer. And the truth of the matter is that validation checks two things before you start using the equipment: accuracy, comparing your instrument with a known target value, and precision, how reproducible your system is. You do those two things before you start using the equipment. And in the lifetime of using the equipment, you actually doing those same two things again by doing your internal QC, which is measuring precision, and your external QC, which is measuring accuracy. So what you did at the beginning is what you keep doing until that instrument dies and is removed from circulation. So those are the difference between validation, verification, correlation. The statistical term for the correlation is what we call regression analysis. You just need to read up a bit more on it. That's all.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Obina, I hope
I
that answered your question. Does anyone else have any more questions? Any comments, questions? Okay, I think this was a long but interesting session. And Mr. James, thank you very much for this session. It's really beautiful. I myself, I picked up a few things and it was refreshing again. Felt like I was back to the lab. Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you so much. You're welcome.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Donald. Thank you everyone for joining the session. And we'll see you again for another session sometime in the month. Okay, there's a question here. Okay, thank you very much, ma'am. Thank you everyone for joining and sparing time to join. Really appreciate